This is going to be my last video about Prince Philip, sort of, and other things. But I did promise you I would make a video about his so-called gaffs. And yeah, I'm not going to quite do that because, well, I'll explain in a minute. So, meanwhile, Prince Harry has got away from the Wicked Witch of the West and has floated over here to prepare to attend his grandfather's funeral. I wonder if he really does think there's no place like home. But we'll see. I promised you some sayings of Prince Philip. They are described as gaffes very often, but I should think nearly all of them were nothing like a mistake, that they were all deeply heartfelt and genuinely meant. And some of them seem to our ears now not that acceptable, but I don't think any of them were intended in any bad way, from what I could see. I know once or twice he could be very irascible, though. I think he called some car park attendant who didn't recognise him silly old fool or something. Now, that's not very nice, is it? But look, you spend your whole life in the public eye. If that's the worst you said about anyone, then that's pretty good going. Anyway, I found a nice cache of Prince Philip's gaffes printed in the Independent, and I'll leave a link in the description. But I think it might be appropriate actually to give you one quote which was addressed to the editor of the Independent at a press reception in 2002. It goes like this. Philip, who are you? Simon Kellner. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Independent, sir. Philip, what are you doing here? Kellner, you invited me. Philip, well, you didn't have to come. Anyway, instead of reciting more Philippiads, I'll just say a few things that I have recently become aware of that I didn't know before, and my impressions of them. I just discovered them bit by bit as I was researching about him. For instance, that he'd been suffering from pancreatic cancer for quite a while. Now, for sure, there'd been rumours. Some time ago, a newspaper, I don't remember which one, printed a story in which it mentioned that His Royal Highness had prostate cancer, and the palace immediately issued some sort of cease and desist on that one, with the stern admonition that the prince did not have prostate cancer. Absolutely not, and retract that forthwith. Now, it did occur to me when I was reading about this that some palace official might have actually leaked the prostate cancer story just so the newspaper would print it, get a rebuke, and then be wary of printing any more cancer stories. It's quite possible. Then again, the prince was receiving medical attention, although I'm sure that the palace would have done its best to surround him with trustworthy and tight-lipped medical practitioners. It's always possible. Do I have this plugged in? Yeah. It's always possible that someone in one of the medical facilities, like a porter or a driver, might have overheard something, slightly misunderstood it, and sold it to the papers. However, the mistake about the prostate cancer was fortuitous, because the palace could then deny it strenuously and not be telling any lies. But what I thought about when I read this was how quiet everyone had been. You can imagine that most celebrities would be dining out on their battle with cancer, wouldn't you? No, it was all a big secret, and he kept up his royal duties, even though, I mean, pancreatic cancer is a very uncomfortable thing to have. I remember him standing at the Queen's Diamond Jubilee celebrations, and that was in 2012. It involved a pageant of small boats on the Thames, And it just so happened the day was absolutely dreadful, rainy. It was cold. We were going to watch it, and we decided against it. I don't know whether it was Have I Got News for You, which is a news program, a jokey news program that was broadcast every Friday night, or perhaps it was Mock the Week. I don't remember, but it was some program like that. And the performers were played a clip from that pageant with close-ups of the Queen and Prince Philip, and they had to make a funny internal dialogue of what the Prince and the Queen were really thinking. And when Prince Philip came up on the screen, one of the comedians said something like, "I wish they'd hurry up. I'm dying for I'm not using the word." A 91-year-old man was standing in the rain paying respect to all the participants who had rehearsed for months for that pageant, and they thought they were being so funny, making a joke about his bladder. A day later, he was in hospital with pneumonia. Okay, so I'll just relate a couple of interesting and telling stories. And this one says here, from the summer of 1932 until the spring of 1937, Philip neither saw nor received any word from his mother, not even a birthday card. "It's simply what happened," he said later. "The family broke up. My mother was ill. My father was in the south of France. I had to get on with it." And that's the way he seemed to look at life. There was no "oh, poor me" about him. When another interviewer asked him what language he'd spoken at home, he replied, "What do you mean, at home?" And indeed, he didn't have a home. He was batted about from aunts and uncles. He didn't even know when he was sent out of school in the summer holidays. He had no idea where he was going to end up for the summer holidays. I talked about his school in my previous video. He was not popular at the German Nazi-dominated school to which his father had sent him in the 1930s. He lasted there 2 terms. They kicked him out, possibly because he'd stood up for a Jewish fellow pupil who was there and who was being bullied, but mostly they weren't happy with him for saying, whenever he could, and laughing about it, that the boys' Hitler salutes reminded him of how boys would ask to be excused from class when they wanted to go to the toilet. You have to remember that his sisters had all been married off into the German aristocracy. He was 13 years old, homeless, and without either father or mother. He would have had plenty of reason to go with the flow. Nevertheless, he was appalled by what was going on in Germany and spoke his mind, even though in those days boys got caned for speaking their minds, remember. As soon as he could after school, he joined the Navy and acquitted himself well during the war. When he met Princess Elizabeth, remember again, he wasn't Prince Philip. He was the impoverished son of an exiled ex-royal family with a mother who'd been locked up in what was then called an insane asylum. And, something else, which he never talked about, and neither did his mother, but she was in Athens during the war, during the German occupation there. She sheltered a Jewish family in her apartment. When the Gestapo called round, she was deaf, but she could lip read in about 5 or 6 languages. And she played up her deafness when the Gestapo called round and pretended not to understand what they were asking. Also, I believe because she was royal, the other royal families managed to send her food parcels, which she immediately gave to the poor of Athens, who were very hungry because the Germans were taking all the rations. She never mentioned that, and neither did Prince Philip. This all came out later. Anyway, back to Princess Elizabeth. The British royal family were not overjoyed about his relationship with her. They thought him very ill-mannered. Well, it was a characteristic. And he was truly without resources as well. All he had was his Navy salary and the occasional hospitality of relatives. I'm not sure about this story, but I do remember reading somewhere that he had to borrow money to buy himself a pair of good shoes for his wedding. Now, obviously, most people would not have worried too much about him repaying them, but even so, it just shows the situation he was in. Okay, so here's a couple of stories of what he thought of himself. Accepting the freedom of the City of London in 1948, he talked about himself and others like him as followers. Our only distinction, he said, was that we did what we were told to do to the very best of our ability and kept on doing it. And then to a group of students and staff at the Chesterfield College of Technology, he said, a lot of time and energy has been spent on arranging for you to listen to me, to take a long time to declare open a building which everyone knows is open already. And finally, I suppose the best story, especially for you Americans watching this, would be as told by a chap called Linton Westray, who'd worked as a butler in the White House for 35 years, serving 8 presidents. Westray tells of an incident in 1979 when Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip were guests there. After dinner, Prince Philip went into the Red Room, wherever that is, which apparently is next to the state dining room. Westray, accompanied by an assistant, was carrying a tray, and he went into the Red Room and found the prince there on his own. Everyone else had gone together to another room. Westray reported as follows: I said, Your Majesty. That was wrong, by the way. Your Majesty would be the Queen or a king in his own right, but Prince Philip would be Your Royal Highness. Just in case you ever meet somebody like that, you should know that. Anyway, it wasn't Westray's fault that he had mistitled him, but you'd think the White House would have briefed him on that, wouldn't you? Anyway, he said, Your Majesty, would you care for a cordial? And Prince Philip said, I'll take one if you let me serve it. That must have been because Westray was holding a tray full of glasses. Apparently, Westray hardly knew how to react to that. He felt very awkward. None of the guests has ever treated him in that way before. But the prince repeated, if you let me pour it, I'll have one with you. So Westray related, he pours it, and we took the same thing that he had, and we had our drink there together and had a little talk while we were there. He told us if we were ever over there in London to stop at Buckingham Palace and see him. Can you imagine the prince serving you? I enjoyed it. You know, we're not supposed to drink and carry on at that time. We're not guests. It was just the three of us in the room, so nobody knew what happened, and I drank my little cordial and had a little conversation. But that was one thing I'll never forget, having been served by royalty. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go on too long, and I shall tell you what Prince Philip said about sermons that went on too long. He said, the mind cannot absorb what the backside cannot endure. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.